Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have great read from Cato.org. Hating terrorists doesn't mean you hate America, posted by Be the Art One, and that's a cross post from the centrist subreddit. And yeah, I would agree with that. I personally don't really care for terrorists, but that doesn't mean I hate America. I personally just don't really care for America's government. I think America is probably one of the better countries in the world from a libertarian perspective, especially when you compare it to a lot of countries out in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America and the like. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Keir Starmer set to announce digital ID cards for all UK adults from FT.com, posted by Agent of Dallas, and that's crosspost from the neoliberal subreddit. And yeah, it looks like an article from Financial Times just saying about how the UK government's not going to have digital IDs for all the adults in the UK. And yeah, that just goes to show you why you shouldn't give up your guns like they did in the UK. It might be dangerous having an unarmed populace like the US does. But regardless, it just goes to show you when you don't have an armed populace, the government can justify enforcing whatever bullshit it wants on you, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Even in the U.S., you still have a lot of government databases, but you have like the Social Security and the census and all that. But it's not quite as bad as the UK yet. Although I'm sure it's going to get there in due time at this point, especially with how openly authoritarian a lot of the people seem to be getting, both in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Kamala's political science logic, communism equals Trump, capitalism equals democracy, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a crosspost from the late stage capitalism subreddit, and that looks like a video of Kamala on Rachel Maddow saying Kamala Harris calls Donald Trump a communist dictator, democracy sustains capitalism. And yeah, this is interesting. It's more criticizing Kamala from the left. It's interesting for a lot of people. That's a big reason why I think she didn't win. She tried to appeal to everyone, but she was too right wing for left wing people and too left wing for right wing people. So she ended up appealing to pretty much no one. And she pretty much had she had nothing other than generic politician speak and orange man bad. So that's why I think she didn't win. But regardless, if you want to call Trump communist, I think that's fine. If you want to call him a Nazi, that's fine. Call him whatever you want to. But I would agree that he's an authoritarian. But with that being said, if the shoe was on the other foot and Kamala was in the White House, she wouldn't be calling herself an authoritarian, but she would still be arguably just as authoritarian as the Orange Man is. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Steve Miller claims simply calling Trump authoritarian incites violence and terrorism from commondreams.org, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, personally, I would disagree with that. I think you should be able to call Trump an authoritarian. But, I do think Steve Miller kind of has a point. I don't really care for the guy, but he kind of has a point that, when the one side that's saying, oh, we gotta turn that temperature, calls anyone who dissents at all a Nazi, a fascist, Hitler, etc., etc. That's not necessarily authoritarian, but they arguably use those terms even more than they do for authoritarian. And yeah, personally, I think if you want to call everyone who dissents at all a Nazi, fascist, Hitler, etc., etc., ultimately you should have the freedom of speech to do so. With that being said, that's not turning down the temperature, especially when you have the general consensus on the left seems to be punch a Nazi, and anyone these days who dissents at all from the official narrative is going to be labeled a Nazi. So you're going to end up pretty much justifying whatever assault on people you get, and that's how you get assassination culture, like what happened to Charlie Kirk. And yeah, that just goes to show you how use freedom of speech, but that doesn't mean I have to like what you say. And you're hypocritical when you say we need to turn on the temperature, but then anyone who dissents at all is a Nazi, fascist, Hitler, etc., etc. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have the free branches of government at the highest level need some skin in the game when it comes to the government shutdowns, posted by Plasma 30, and they said if they shut down the government, then the reps, the senators, POTUS, VPOTUS, and the cabinet should not get paid. The business of government completely stops in DC, and the only thing that gets discussed by anyone is the budget, and when things reopen, they don't get back pay, put a fire under their ass to fix their shit as quickly as possible. And yeah, I would agree with that. If the government shut down, no one should be getting paid. But with that being said, what the U.S. says is a government shutdown is often pretty much false advertising. They say it's a government shutdown, but the cops are still active. and the military is still active, and pretty much a lot of government services are still active. But it's just like they just put like a few barriers at the national parks, and that's pretty much it. And you can just walk, and even then you can just walk right across them. So yeah, I personally think the term government shutdown is kind of false advertising. But if it was if they want to, if there is a government shutdown, I agree that the people in Washington, the government, federal government workers in Washington D.C. shouldn't be getting paid, especially the ones who are in elected office, such as the representatives, POTUS, the vice president, and the cabinet. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump's TikTok deal payment criticized as shakedown scheme by experts from NPR.org, posted by FilmZL5563. And yeah, I personally don't really care how they're selling TikTok to a U.S. buyer and Oracle, which is more Trump aligned. But regardless, if it ultimately it's a lot like how I think Nippon Steel wanted to buy U.S. Steel, and Joe Biden stopped that from happening. The government is always gonna look out for the protections of American companies rather than foreign companies. And I personally think that might be well intentioned, but it's like with tariffs. Just because it's well intentioned doesn't mean that it doesn't go against free trade and the free market. If a foreign company wants to buy an American company, that's fine. If an American company wants to buy a foreign company, that's fine. But TikTok was pretty much forced to sell to an American company or risk getting banned. And that just goes to show you that, that's very much not the free market if you're forced to do something that you don't want to. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for TikTok. I think it's very much a propaganda mill. Not nearly as bad as Reddit. Reddit is like pretty much Der Stummer was for the Nazis at this point. But if it has to force to sell, I personally don't care for it, but that's just how it is sometimes. The government can justify enforcing whatever it is it wants to enforce on people, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Also, I love how this headline says by experts, because whenever the media wants someone to wants to push the agenda, they always say, "Oh, experts say this," or and that's something that it's important to realize as well. The media is going to use the term experts for anyone who wants to push whatever narratives that they agree with, and that's important to realize with whoever gets that label. Then we have "You Can't Make This Shit Up," posted by Ragnarok KXG, and that's a tweet from Alex Jones at Real Alex Jones. "I'm officially joining the Democratic Party as of today. In celebration of their wonderful work, I have adopted a hairstyle that matches their policies." And it's a picture of him with kind of a Hitler mustache. And Nick Letzko replies, "Growing a Hitler mustache down the libs." And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but Alex Jones has always been kind of a troll, and pretty much a lot of people these days are trolls, especially Donald Trump. But Reddit's always going to take the bait from them. And yeah, personally, if Alex Jones wants to grow a Hitler mustache, that's fine. But if people don't like it, that's fine too. But I think if you want Alex Jones to go away, you have to stop giving attention. Same with Donald Trump and pretty much all the other trolls that the Redditors keep taking their bait from. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And we have "Holy shit, self-reporting rightoids go ape shit over Indiana Jones game's anti-fascist message," posted by Ragnarok KXG, and that's a YouTube video from the Humanist Report. And yeah, personally, if games want to have what they consider to be an anti-fascist message, that's fine. But it reminds me of the new Wolfenstein game that came out back in 2017. Well, I guess it's not too new anymore. It's pretty much a decade ago at this point. But it was just like, oh, we got to make America Nazi-free again. And that just goes to show you how, increasingly, anyone who dissents at all is seen as a fascist, Nazi, Hitler, etc., etc. And if you want to label them, that's fine, but it's rhetoric like this that leads to punch a Nazi and assassination culture, like what happened to Charlie Kirk, and that's not something I personally cared for, especially by the side who says, "Oh, we gotta turn down the temperature." And yeah, it's like I said earlier, I think it's hypocritical. And yeah, if the media wants to say, "Oh, you gotta be anti-fascist," that's fine. But when anyone who questions them at all is labeled a fascist, suddenly it's just another buzzword that has no meaning. Next we have Libertarian Party of Kentucky condemns LNC censure of New Hampshire affiliate from independentpoliticalreport.com, posted by Swamp Yankee Dan. That's a cross post from the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for the LPNH's constant Fortune-esque edgelording, saying, oh, we're pretty much pretending to be Nazis and all that, But, ultimately, I would agree with the LP Kentucky condemning the LNC censure because, it's very much free speech for me, but not for thee, If, the libertarian position is you gotta support free speech, and if if the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire wants to be Fortune-esque edgelords, then that's pretty much their brand at this point, Ultimately, they'll justify what they justify, I would say the same thing if it was a more wokertarian affiliate like Libertarian Party of Louisiana, just because you can you can issue an opinion on it doesn't mean you should. That's very much a libertarian position, you shouldn't be enforcing your opinions on others, and if one libertarian state affiliate wants to issue more MAGA Fortune-esque edgelord messaging, that's on them. You shouldn't have censorship, which will only lead to censorship, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have NJ governor race plunged into chaos after feds release Sherrill's military docs. No veteran's record is safe from NJ.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, that just goes to show you how, ultimately, it looks like the Democratic nominee needs to be in the military. And, that's probably why it's good reason not to join the military. The government already has tons of databases, like, as I said, like Social Security, the census, the sex offender registry. And, the military is just more databases for them to collect on you. So, if you want to join the military, I personally, I've tried to join the military in the past, but they won't let me because I'm on an SSRI. But, if you want to join the military, that's fine. But, just be aware that the government will, you probably arguably use it to get more data on you that could be used against you later. Like, it seems to be in this case for this woman's military documents. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have U.S. preparing options for military strikes on drug targets inside Venezuela, sources say, from NBCNews.com, posted by LegioX. And, yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. I think the U.S. clearly just wants regime change in Venezuela and is using this as a pretext to do it. But regardless, ultimately, the U.S. is always going to have be trying to go into foreign countries and try and regime change them. Back in the Obama years, it was Libya and Syria. Back in the Bush years, it was Iraq and Afghanistan. There's always going to be doing that. Trump says, "Oh, I'm different from the neocons that preceded me in the Republican Party," but in reality, he's just a secret neocon who's going to justify a lot of the stuff that came before him, and that just goes to show you, politicians are very much, they'll say one thing and then do the opposite, and that's why you can't trust a lot of what they say, because Trump says, oh, I'm different than the neocon establishment that preceded me, but, ultimately, he's still going to justify regime change in countries like Venezuela, and that's very much why you can't trust a lot of, what he says. Even then, personally, he's just mostly a figurehead. He's not really the one pushing the regime change, but it's the military and the generals who I think really push the regime change and the military-industrial complex and the deep states, the FBI, CIA, NSA, and the like. But, that's another thing, you have to realize that the elected officials ultimately aren't really the ones running the show. It's oftentimes the unelected officials and bureaucrats who are, and I think that's very much what's happening here as well. Next we have Dear Leader knows more about medicine than anyone, posted by C.H. Relax, and that's crossovers from the Family Medicine subreddit, and that looks like a truth from Donald Trump. A truth, pregnant woman, and they turn on the caps lock, don't use Tylenol unless absolutely necessary, don't give Tylenol to your young child for virtually any reason, break up the MMR shot into free wholesale separate shots, not mixed, take chicken pea shot separately, take hepatitis B shot 12 years old or older, and importantly, take vaccine 5 separate medical visits, President DJT. And, yeah, personally, I don't think Donald Trump is a licensed medical official, but, ultimately, if he wants to say whatever he wants to say about, medical issues, I think he should be able to. I think that's freedom of speech, and if people want to listen to him, that's on them. Personally, I wouldn't really care to listen to him because, I don't really think he has any medical experience, But, if people want to listen to whoever they want to listen to, they should be able to, and that's very much the libertarian position. The libertarian position is, if you want to convince others of anything, you should be able to use your words to do so, and if others want to believe it, they should have the free will to justify doing whatever they want to in that regard. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.